Excellent. So tonight, the study is going to be taking place in the American Standard Version. And that is because it's the one piece that's available here in the Logos Bible software that I'm using to take us through this study. I'm going to share my screen throughout so that you can follow along and see what I'm looking at, so we can take a look at some of the context in the passages that we look at. This is not going to be an exhaustive study of the topic of lust. This is picking and choosing from a few key verses that are commonly thrown out in order for us to understand what the word means and how it is used in the scripture. This is the approach that I bring. This is the angle that I bring to the study, is a background in rhetoric and hermeneutics and interpreting texts according to the context. So basically looking at the other words that the author uses, the surrounding language, the scenarios that they set up, and using that to understand what they mean by a word. Now, in this case, we're looking at the word lust. And when I share my screen, I'm going to switch over quick. Well, actually, you can look this up if you're interested, but Webster's dictionary defines lust as relating to sexual desire, but it is not the sexual desire itself. It is an intensity of that desire. Now, it's the intensity part that most people miss, because the common usage of the word lust in English means sexual desire. Has nothing to do with how intense it is, how overwhelming it is. However, when we begin to look back into the Bible, if we read the definition of lust as any sexual desire into the passages, they begin to be confusing. They begin to not make quite as much sense. But if we take this idea of lust as a certain intensity of desire, as an insatiable craving into the text, we're going to see that this aligns with what the authors have to say and with how they use it. Because, and this might surprise some of you, where this word lust is used, it is not always in reference to sexual desire. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen. And let's see, this is actually where I want to end up. Let's start off with one of the most famous passages on lust, which is found in Matthew chapter 5. So this is Jesus speaking at the Sermon on the Mount. Give me a second. I'm just going to check and be sure I don't have anyone joining in from Zoom. All right, we're good. So Jesus speaking here on the Sermon of the Mount, he begins to talk about the idea of lust and adultery. And so we move on here. Jesus is talking about a number of different things, basically saying, here's how things were in the past, and here's how I am reframing them. One of the things he said was, in the past, thou shalt not commit adultery. So he's citing Moses here in the Ten Commandments. And adultery is another word that we're going to have to go in and look at, because the fundamental meaning of it is a breaking of covenant or breaking of contract. So Moses said, don't break your contracts, but I say unto you, everyone who looks on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. Now, this is the reason why you'll see Christian men often turning their heads away when an attractive woman walks by, is because they don't want to notice that she's hot, because if they do, chances are that means that they're lusting. So as we go through today, we're gonna explore whether or not this is actually the case. Because if it is, we don't want to be committing adultery with people in our hearts. Committing adultery is a violation of a contract. And between every human being, if you study some of the philosophers, there is a contract of honor, respect, admiration, sovereignty that exists. And to take something from someone, for example, sexual gratification, without their permission, without their consent, is a violation of that contract. So Jesus says, everyone who looks on a woman to lust has committed adultery. Now, there's a couple of things that I want to point out that Jesus does not say here. He did not say whoever looks on a woman has committed adultery with her. That in itself is something to think about. The other thing that he doesn't say is everyone who looks on a woman that is not their own partner. It's another big one, especially for those people who are married, who are like, oh, well, it's fine to lust, And this is where our definitions get us into trouble, because it is fine to have sexual desire within marriage. That's a beautiful thing. And if it's not there, it's really quite tragic. But the thing is, lust being an uncontrollable burning fire, which is how I'm going to define it and where we're going to eventually see the scripture uses lust as well. There's no excuse for that, even within a marriage context. So continuing on, everyone who looks on a woman to lust. Now, again, Jesus did not say everyone who looks on a woman who is not wearing clothes. And you'll find this in Islamic cultures, and I love this. I reference this in every article I write on the subject, but Weird Al's Amish Paradise was a music video released several years ago. It was probably over a decade ago, because it was one of those first YouTube videos to go around on the internet. And he has a clip in there, which is just brilliant, is an Amish porn magazine where you have some girls pulling up their skirts just far enough to reveal stockings covering their ankles. And the boys just go crazy. And I think he understood something about lust, is that it doesn't require a naked body. It doesn't require somebody you're not married to. It doesn't have anything to do with looking at a woman. It has to do with how we respond to that woman. So everyone who looks on the woman, whoever it might happen to be, and again, Jesus is probably speaking to men here. Very interesting that there's not an inversion of this too. I can rabbit hole so far on language. I need someone here to stop me. If you want to join me next time, I do have a Facebook group, which you're welcome to look for. It's called, if you go to facebook.com/groups/intimacy unleashed, you'll find my Facebook group, and everyone in there actually has a link to join in on this study, to ask questions, offer comments as they're interested. Would love to have you next time. So here's Jesus, and this is why we started here. Is this verse is the most often misused, basically saying, don't look at a woman who you're not married to, who's not wearing clothes. That's basically how people interpret it these days. It's not what it's saying. For some people, they may have difficulty controlling their desire, and a naked woman may activate in them an uncontrollable sexual desire. Now, all sexual desire can be controlled. But the thing is, as with any appetite, you need to be trained. A kid's appetite for sugar is limitless. A teenager's appetite for sex probably feels the same way. Without either parents to say, hey, let's not eat sugar all the time, let's actually have something healthy, or without teachers or parents, hopefully you're having these conversations with your kids to teach you how to hold out sexual desire in a way that's healthy, chances are you show up, you see a beautiful woman. If you don't know how to respond to your sexual desire, you may actually fall into lust, where you begin to fantasize, where your desire takes hold of you, controls you, grabs hold of you, and causes you to violate your contract of honor and respect to that woman. Now, if that's something that resonates with you and something that you struggle with, let's talk. Send me a message on Facebook, YouTube, whatever. Would love to dive a little deeper with you, because as Christians, we have this text, we have this ability to understand, and we also have sexual desire. And I think it's a shame that we have not learned how to respond to our sexual desire in a way that looks like love and not like lust. But again, as long as we're confusing lust with any sexual desire, we have a really poor starting point. So let's keep going with this study. And one comment I want to make at this point is that as I go through this study, I'm exploring, right? I'm open to questions, I'm open to feedback, open to learning, because every time I open this book, this Bible, this ancient, mystic, amazing text, I tend to learn something new. So if you have any unique insights, would love to hear about them. Let's continue on to the book of Mark. So sticking in the Gospels, we have the book of Mark. Let's go to Mark 4:6. See what that pops up. I think that might be the wrong one. Here we go. Still looking for the word lust. Grab a little context. So again, this is Jesus. He's teaching by the seaside to a multitude, and he's telling them a parable. So Jesus is telling a story that has a lot of meanings packed in. So when teachers teach today, typically they're trying to give you just 2 or 3 tiny little things for you to think about. This is standard advice for preparing a speech. Hebrew teachers, not so much. Especially when they're using parables, they're trying to pack as much possible meaning into a short story as they can. And so there are so many different ways that we can read this. Jesus' parable, a lot of us have heard this about the sower who scatters seeds. Some of it is taken away by birds. Some of it's choked. Some of it dries out in the sun. Some of it takes root and doesn't actually grow. And finally, some of the seeds actually bear fruit. And so this is often taught in church, and we want to be the seeds that bear fruit. And when Jesus is alone, so after he's done teaching, his disciples asked him about the parables. Like, so what should we learn from this? Which is really great. I always love having access to a teacher who says enigmatic things and you're like, what did you mean by that? When you can come in and ask, you're like, you know you're going to get something special. So here what we have in verse 18 is Jesus explaining the parable. And he's telling this to his friends. So we're kind of getting an inside look at what he's talking about. Unto you is given the mystery of the kingdom of God. All right. Know you not this parable? What a guy. I think sometimes we often imagine Jesus being very nice. Not always. And these in like manner sown in rocky places, and others that are sown among thorns. So if any of you are gardeners and you've planted seeds and they grew up and there were weeds next to them. Interesting that he uses the word thorns, because this is a reminder back to Genesis chapter 3, the promise that because humanity chose to live by the knowledge of good and evil, we were going to have to deal with this, that thorns and thistles would come up where seeds were sown. And this could be both literal and metaphorical. Here we have, there are thorns, there are people who have heard the word. The word is a powerful thing. It's a seed. It contains a promise inside of it. It's meant to grow up inside of our lives. But there are 3 things that choke the word and it becomes unfruitful. So when you have one plant that you really want to grow and all these other weeds come around and soak all the nutrients out of the soil, that plant withers and doesn't bear fruit. It's very sad. And here are the things that take it away: the cares of the world, the deceitfulness of riches, and the lusts of other things entering in. So if you simply read this as cares of the world, deceitfulness of riches, it's possible that if you look at this on a surface level, you're like, oh yeah, money and sex come in and they choke the word and it becomes unfruitful. So therefore avoid money and avoid sex. And this is kind of how people have come to the Bible. And we have a lot of issue with greed and with lust because we have not learned healthy relationships with money or healthy relationships with sex. And if we don't do that, we find ourselves choked out by the cares of the world, deceitfulness of riches, and the desire, the excessive desire for other things. So when your desire for anything other than God comes in, or other than this word comes in, it can choke it out and keep it from being fruitful. I think Jesus' second story is talking about a light being put under a bushel. And like, you may have that light, that seed may be in the earth, but it's not going to grow unless the soil is tended, unless it has room. And if all of your desire, all of your passion is consumed by something, be that by sex, be that by money, be that fame, success, family, church, that seed's not going to grow. Let's continue on, because this is just opening up this idea that there is lust for other things. I want to carry us back. We'll jump around. Let's actually continue on in the New Testament, and then we'll look at the Old Testament for a second and see a few examples of where lust comes into play and causes problems. And in fact, let's do that right now. Go to Numbers 11:4. This is a story of the nation of Israel and their let's see where they are. Yeah, it looks like they set forward from the Mount of Jehovah, 3 days journey to seek out a resting place. So 3 days after the people leave Mount Sinai, where they receive the 10 commandments, this is probably months after they heard God speak and freaked out. But still, they heard God speak. Like, that's pretty incredible. Not a lot of people get to say that they have heard God thunder from a mountain and scare the living daylights out of them. So they heard that three days after they depart from this space where so much incredible stuff happened. There were murmurs, speaking evil in the ears of Jehovah. Jehovah is the specific name for God that is used in the Old Testament. And this is referring to one particular representation of God. I'm not going to get into this, but if you're curious, drop me a message. We can talk more. You come to this place called Tebra, the fire of Jehovah burnt among them. So this is a really unfortunate thing. Really what we're looking at, the mixed multitude. So what this means is people that were not of pure Hebrew blood. Kind of an interesting concept. We have very much a sense of racial superiority carried through the Old Testament. So we're going to see stuff like this. And this was not unique to the Hebrew people. In fact, mixed races are a somewhat modern phenomenon. And even here in this country, it's been only recently that we've opened up to recognize that we are all human beings created in the image of God. And this whole idea of racial purity that preoccupied the Nazi regime really has some terrible effects. So yeah, look, I'm getting sidetracked already just by one set of words, but you see how deep you can go when you come to a text. This is what an English nerd will do to you when you drop into the Bible. So this mixed multitude lusted exceedingly. Now, do you see how this is an idea of scale? This is an idea of magnitude. My guess is that everybody there was hungry. Everybody there had what you might call desire for food. And what we're not going to say is that a desire for food is somehow bad, somehow wrong, somehow unhealthy. In fact, it's a very natural way for your body to function, is when it doesn't have food, when it doesn't have the nutrients it needs, it desires food. But you can get to a point where food governs your life and takes over you, and all you think about is food. Now, this can come from starvation, which potentially was happening here, or it can simply come because you're not satisfied with what you have. And I think this is what's happening, because I believe the manna had begun to fall even before this. So these people, they wanted meat to eat. They wanted some particular kind of thing. Their lust was for flesh. We remember the fish, which we ate in Egypt, cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, garlic, all this stuff. Like, it sounds really good. So imagine you're in the desert. Of course, you're going to desire this food. This stuff sounds delicious. Your imagination's going to go there. But what happened is there was exceeding lust. So this idea of consuming desire. And let's actually unpack this word a little bit more. Move back to the New Testament, 1 John chapter 2, I believe it's verse 16. Let's see. Here's another famous passage about lust. And again, if you're coming to this saying that lust is sexual desire, you're going to have some difficulty understanding the full scope of the passage. This one's a little bit easier. Again, we're looking at the last half of a paragraph here. And this is in the book of John. I love John as a writer. He really captures a lot of the mystic side of Christianity. But he comes and he says something like this: love not the world. This is significant. If you want to know more about what he means by this, go look at John chapter 14. So the Apostle John, who wrote one of the Gospels named after him, also wrote this. This is a letter. So you have two different types of writing. The Gospels are more of a, here's the record of what I remember Jesus did and said. And this book of 1 John is a letter that he sent to some people that he knew. And so here's what he says. He says, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. Let's see. I'm really curious what this word world is. It is cosmo. It's cosmos. This is the same word world that shows up in John 3:16, that famous verse that God so loved the world. Interesting, huh? So God loved the world, but you do not love the world or the things that are in the world. And what he's referring to is something specific. Let's see. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, let's see, what is in the world? The lust. What is in the world? Excessive desire of the flesh. It is possible, again, teenagers want sex, children want sugar. There are lusts of the flesh. Even Aristotle, who was one of the famous Greek teachers, preceded the writing of John by about 400 years. He wrote a book on ethics called the Nicomachean Ethics, in which he says that it is necessary for the young person to be trained to desire that which is good for him. If he is not taught to pursue what is good, his natural desire may lead him into something that is not good for him. And so you have the lust of the flesh being driven by your body, excessively controlled by what does your body want right now. Do you want sugar? Go have it. Do you want fat? Go have that. Do you want to go eat another burger from a fast food restaurant? Go have that. I'm sorry if that's a little bit offensive. Food is a big deal for me because I feel like you have a lot of people who are not in control of the lust, this desire of the flesh. Again, this is an uncontained, uncontrolled, burning desire for something that can be good for you, and it may not be good for you. But when it's blown out of proportion, it is always unhealthy. The lust of the eyes. The eyes are never satisfied with seeing. Let's look at Instagram today, right? We always want to see more amazing, magical things. I'm trying to learn how to use social media and to share things that people want to look at because the eyes always want the new. We want the unexpected. We want something to dazzle us. So we can seek that. We can seek that. We can be dominated and controlled by that. People use a phrase, wanderlust. And while I love that word, it also has a dark side. It has the side of being pulled away from something that you may value. It has the side of being pulled without being able to control, without being able to contain. And then we have the vainglory of life. So my focus is on lust, not so much the vainglory of life, but you understand that we're talking about things. Life is good. The eyes are wonderful. Seeing beautiful things is amazing. The body is incredible. But when we take these things out of proportion, when we begin to think that our life is the scope of everything that is significant, when what we see, we just need more captured by our fantasy and live all day inside of a screen. This is what lust means. It means to miss out on the love of the Father and to be immersed in something that John is calling the world. And the world passes away. All of these desires, they come and they go, and we can learn how to live with them and to flow with them and to honor them and to use them in ways that are good and beautiful. And John says the world passes away and the lust thereof. So there is going to be excessive desire. There will be storms that turn into hurricanes. Not everything is smooth. And you know, sometimes as human beings, we're going to find ourselves overwhelmed by our desires. We're going to find ourselves falling into lust. And what John is saying, and he's going to say throughout here, that of course, we're going to fall into these things, but we have an advocate with the Father. We're in this process. We're in this journey of growth. And the point is not that we never fall, but that we know we're able to get back up. And I think this is the good news of Christianity. So lust is not something to fear, even though it is something that is not very nice to experience. And again, I'm not talking about sexual desire. I'm talking about an excessive, uncontrollable, burning passion. And in fact, I think that's what we're going to see in the next passage we look at. Let's look at 1 Thessalonians 4:5. And again, if anyone decides to drop in, like, feel free to leave a comment if you want to, if you want me to take a look at something. I'm going to take a minute here and see if I can check over at YouTube. All right. 1 Thessalonians 4:5. Here's one that will be familiar to people. Finally then, so we look at the beginning of the chapter. Finally then, brothers. So this is kind of like one would think the end. It reminds me of a Minnesota goodbye. It's where they begin saying goodbye in the 4th chapter, and it doesn't actually happen until the end of the 5th. But here we have, finally then, brothers, we beseech and exhort you, as you received how you ought to walk and to please God. So Paul is writing a letter to people, to a church in Thessalonica, which is the name of the city. I believe it's somewhere around Turkey right now. It's a place you can actually go, which is kind of cool. For you know the charge we gave you through the Lord Jesus. So Paul is a leader. He's a teacher. He's somebody that is mentoring these people. And here's what he says: for this is the will of God, even your sanctification, that ye abstain from fornication. Now, this word is a word that is known to English people, rather familiar to us. And fornication is how the word porneia was translated. If you want to see a little bit more detail on this, I have a YouTube video on porneia and the rhetoric of how we came to understand porneia, which is also a word that means uncontrolled passion, and how we came to see that as meaning sex outside of marriage. I'm going to pass over it, but let's be fair. I'm going to come back to this word, and we'll probably have a live study on this word as well. I saw a YouTube short this week, which inspired me to actually make this study, which is it's a clip from The Princess Bride, where this fellow keeps saying inconceivable. And one of the mates who was journeying with him responds, I do not think that word means what you think it means. Because inconceivable, of course, means you couldn't possibly imagine it, and you could have definitely imagined and conceived of whatever happened. So here, abstain from fornication, and know this, at least, fornication is a misuse of sexual desire. And what kind of misuse is it? Well, let's see. Namely, or in other words, see what follows this when you look at a sentence is going to help us understand what comes before. What fornication looks like, it looks like the passion of lust. Now, for the people that Paul was writing to, the word passion didn't really have a positive connotation. Passion typically meant something like what we would imagine a child having a temper tantrum, or if you imagine, if you've read the Iliad, passion being the thing that drove certain soldiers to do crazy things, passion being the reason why the Greeks went to invade Troy over a woman. So passion being something blown out of proportion. Now, we like to think of zest, and I'll just even use the word lust for life as being a positive thing. And yes, I will say there's a distinction to be made here between enthusiasm, which is to be full of spirit and life, and lust, which is to be dominated and controlled and excessively gripped by a desire that probably shouldn't have an excessive grip on you. In fact, as a Christian, we talk about this idea of purity, and this isn't a side note, but purity means the desire or consisting of only one thing. This is what a pure diamond, a pure substance mean, that which is only one thing. So purity means having passion only for one thing. So now here we have a passion of lust. So lust is itself here the passion. And that's what I'm trying to show. And the passion of lust. So again, as we've talked about, having an excessive experience of desire, not having sexual desire that is healthy, but having a sexual desire that takes over, burns, consumes. So here's the opposite of that. Knowing how to possess yourself of your own vessel in sanctification and honor. How do we possess our bodies? How do we possess, let's go even more specific and say, how do we possess our sexual desire with sanctification and with honor? Part of that comes from knowing God. And here we continue that no one transgress and wrong his brother in the matter, because the Lord is avenger and all these things. Wow, this is very interesting. This passage has a lot more into it than we're going into. Only know there is a connection between this idea of lust and this idea of fornication, because Paul uses passion of lust to explain to us what fornication means. Let's look at one other example here of, wow, there's so much good stuff. I think I might have to write a slightly more organized blog at some point. But this is the opening. This is the initial exploration I'm doing of this topic here on YouTube, and then probably posting it in a couple other places. So, you know what? Actually, I'm gonna move that. We're still on this idea of the passion of lust. And let's continue and look at a couple examples of what this means. We've already seen this can be lust for food. This can be lust for all kinds of things, that lust is really an overinflation of some kind of desire. An example of this, and the reason why lust can be so terrible. Let's go take a look at 2 Samuel, I believe it's chapter 13. Now, this is an example of sexual desire carried to an extreme. This is an example of how lust can really ruin not only your life, but so many other people's lives. And it looks as though Amnon, who is a primary character here, Amnon is a man, he's a prince, who thinks his stepsister is just the hottest thing that has ever happened to the nation of Israel. I don't think he put it in quite those words, but it looks as though he says, I love Tamar. This is what he's saying. Now, if you actually get in and read the whole story, he wasn't experiencing love. He was experiencing something that we call passion, obsession. These are the words that we use when lust makes its appearance. We don't use the word lust. We don't say that. We say obsession. We say passion. He was in love with Tamar, so much so that he was sick of bed and he could do nothing about it. And so his friend comes to help him out and gives him a plan to rape his sister, which this is really a sad passage. And so many different things happen, a lot of cultural implications. But what comes of this is that he violated her. When you love somebody, you don't force them to have sex with you. When you are experiencing lust and when you are letting that drive your behavior and your life, that is when this happens. That is why Jesus talked about lust as being a violation of the covenant that we have with other human beings, to treat them with honor, to see their beauty and respond with admiration and with love and with giving of ourselves to them as opposed to taking. Then Amnon hated her with exceeding great hatred. So I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but sometimes this sort of experience where your strong desire for another person immediately turns into loathing the moment that you've had sex. It's telling you something about what's going on and what you're experiencing. And it's not something to be ashamed of. It's something to look at, something to learn about yourself, something to look at and say, oh, here's what's going on. And ask yourself the question, is this something I want to do again? Is this really everything that I'm looking for? Because obviously, sex with this woman was not everything that Amnon was looking for. Lust is an incredibly deceptive thing. So we come all the way through this story, and this story is actually the beginning of the breaking apart of the kingdom that David put together. And this was one of his sons and one of his daughters. It's really a tragic story. But let's look. It gets even worse. I'm going to take us to one other passage that's going to help us understand this biblical concept of lust. Lust is not sexual desire. It is a distortion of sexual desire. Let's see if I can spell this. Ezekiel. Those of you who know where I'm going, you're welcome to cover your ears if you want to. We're going to Ezekiel 23, verse 20. So this is prophetic imagery. Ezekiel was a prophet of the Old Testament people. And so prophets often speak with what we would call today poetic language. In other words, they're using imagery to help people to understand something that's going on conceptually. And what this prophet is using is talking about the people of Israel and how they were not faithful to God, how they were supposed to have one love, and yet they went and they served other gods. They're drawn away. And so we have all of this sexual imagery, which is actually fascinating when you look at the Old Testament. All of the sexual imagery that comes the way through, particularly in the way that God describes his relationship with humanity and with the nation of Israel in particular. You have imagery of sex and you have imagery of marriage. Oftentimes these two things are in fact separated. And so looking at each one of those is very interesting. So Chaldea, Babylonians came to her into the bed of love. They defiled her with their whoredom. Like we can understand this idea. She was polluted with them. Her soul was alienated from them. Sounds like exactly what happened with Amnon and Tamar, right? She wants them. Here's a woman experiencing lust now in contrast with a man. And then as soon as she had received what she thought she wanted, her soul was alienated from them. Yet she multiplied her whoredoms, and because we're trying to look for what we're talking about in terms of lust, lust is about excessive desire, and she doted upon. So this word is actually translated in other Bible versions as she lusted after their paramours. And here we have this idea of excessiveness, whose flesh is the flesh of asses, whose issue is like the issue of horses. So we're actually talking about an ejaculation. And if any of you have ever observed this, many people growing up in cities have not observed sex happening among animals quite as much as people used to when they grew up really connected with nature, and the birds and the bees actually meant something. But you can see that this lust is referring to excessiveness. So the sexual experience that they offer is not even human anymore. So getting closer to the end, let's go to Romans. And this one is going to be one that raises a lot of questions for most of you, because Romans chapter 1 is a very controversial passage in our culture right now. And here we have two uses of the word lust. And again, remembering that this is about excess of desire, not sexual desire itself. Wherefore God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts. So something about their hearts were desiring something. Uncleanness, that their bodies should be dishonored. What did that mean? Well, their bodies being dishonored among themselves meant exchanging the truth of God for a lie and worshiping and serving the creature rather than the creator. It almost sounds like the choice that we were facing in 1 John. Love not the world, things that are in the world, versus love the Father. This idea, this call of the Christian to purity, to having a singular desire. And even if we look at that Old Testament passage, which hopefully grossed you out somewhat, this is the idea of having one singular desire. And this is a theme that is consistent throughout the entire Bible, is that lust of their hearts is taking them into a place that is not good. I would imagine the desires of their hearts, there's many of them, are not a problem. But when they become excessive, when they become unmanageable, when they grow out of proportion, when they take hold and begin to control the person, unfortunate things happen. For this cause, God gave them up unto vile passions. Again, we have this word lust and passion coming back into play. And if you remember the word fornication, which is what I would say is our English mistranslation of the word porneia, you have this idea of letting desire control you, define your life. For the women changed the natural use into that which is against nature, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, did what? Burned. This is why I keep on talking about lust. Lust of the flesh and lust of the eyes. This is this idea of something that cannot be satisfied. Lust is a desire that cannot be satisfied, and it never will be, which is the tragedy of it, because those who find themselves burning with lust, like having a desire to drink water and drinking gallons and gallons, and yet never being satisfied. This is what happens when you have lust. This is the outcome. Burning in their lust, one toward another. This is not even, and again, so if we read this passage as burning in their sexual desire, I would say even once you put that word burning in the front, it's unfortunate, because this is the idea of hell itself. It's the desire that can never be satisfied. And I have witnessed this firsthand. I have seen the look in people's face who are consumed by lust. It's one of the most tragic things in the world. In fact, one of the chapters in my book that's coming up soon describes this. It describes two different people who are consumed by lust, one of whom is a hollowed out shell of a human being who has no life, no vitality left in them. And then the other is someone who is so full of sexual desire that to receive even one look from them makes you feel uncomfortable and unsafe, because you know that they have no control over their need to gratify their sexual desire. This is what lust can do. So I hope this has helped us to unpack and understand what I consider a tragedy of sexuality, because lust is a distortion of desire that is incredibly beautiful, that is a totally natural and wonderful part of life. And if we look away from it, and if we hide from sex, if we don't teach it, again, remember the child who craves sugar. If we don't teach them how to enjoy it in a way that is responsible, delicious, pleasurable, they'll make themselves sick. They'll never grow up into a healthy human being. And the same thing can happen if we don't respond to sex in a way that is open, in a way that honors this gift. So I'm going to end with a little bit more of an encouraging note, because some of the New Testament authors also offer us the opposite of lust and what we can do to avoid it. And the first one I want to go to is actually the 2 Timothy 2:22, because a lot of people are familiar with this passage, and a lot of people will cite one verse. And in fact, verse 22, they will cite, it was 4 words out of this book to say, do not look at porn. It's essentially what they say. And certainly pornography can be a big part of the experience of lust. But let's look and see what Paul is actually talking about in this letter to his friend and protege, Timothy. This is the 2nd chapter of the book, and he's giving him some instructions for how to, of these things, put them in remembrance. So Paul is saying, tell these people about Jesus risen from the dead. This sounds like some really good standard theological stuff. Give diligence to present thyself approved unto God. So now this is some personal instruction from Paul to Timothy. But shun profane babbling. So be careful how you're talking. the word will eat. So people saying the resurrection had passed already, overthrowing faith. All right, so we get down here. In a house, there are not only vessels of gold and silver, but also of wood and of earth, some unto honor and some unto dishonor. If a man therefore purge himself from these, so probably the dishonorable things, or no, of these, what are these? Departing from unrighteousness. So probably purge yourself from unrighteousness. You will be to honor, sanctified, ready for the use, prepared unto every good work. And within that, after all that preparation, now here is the command to flee youthful lusts. What kind of lusts? The lusts that youth have. For what kind of desires do young people have that tend to grow and take hold of their life and consume them in ways that are unhealthy? That's probably what youthful lusts are referring to. And the opposite of fleeing youthful lusts is following righteousness, faith, love, peace. I'm looking for the word abstinence in here somewhere because that's what people have read for years. I just don't see it. So all of this and foolish and ignorant questions refuse, knowing they engender strife. So this means nothing to do with how we use gender today. And the Lord's servant must not strive. So what we're talking about is striving and babblings, and to flee youthful lusts means to not do that. Nobody like I came to look at this passage a couple days ago, and you know how every time you come around to a passage you see something new. I came around expecting there to be something about sex around here, right? It's absolutely incredible to me that this little section of a verse is so much taken out of context in the church. If you follow me on TikTok, which please don't for another couple of weeks, I'm still figuring out how to use it. But I just posted a video on there today, which is a confession that I make about how angry I get when the Bible is misused. I'm going to guess next time you hear a preacher talking about sex, they're going to quote this. And they're not going to say anything about the importance of avoiding strife. And yet, for the most part, when people think about the church and how it relates to sex, they think of a place that it's not easy to go, a place they're going to experience shame, a place they're going to be scared someone's going to find out about something that they did. It's not a place where the opposite of youthful lust is not striving. Not a place of being gentle toward everyone, ready to teach, forbearing, in meekness, correcting people that oppose themselves, correcting people that are harming themselves. If maybe God will give them repentance. Like, wow, we have so much to learn because this verse, yeah, let's bring this into our conversations about sex. Let's bring this idea that helping people recover themselves out of lust, because lust is one of these snares of the devil. It's one of these deceptive things. It's one of these burnings. And here, interesting enough, here, this part of the passage, this chapter 3, this is my lust. My lust is for learning. I have a never-ending passion, a burning desire, and it actually causes me problems because I will spend all of my time learning and never coming to know the truth. And by knowledge, we mean embodiment, living out. I feel incredibly satiated right now. Like just looking at this, led away by diverse lust. Who are these people led away by diverse lust? These ones who are ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. So we've gone through this Bible study. It's been about 50 minutes now. And all that I've done is taken a look at the verses around the word. This is something that you can do too. Anytime you take a look at a passage and somebody is like, hey, flee youthful lusts, don't notice your cute neighbor. Turn your face away when you see a beautiful woman on the street. Flee youthful lusts. Next time they say that and you're like, is that what that means? Because like, I don't see anything here about noticing someone who's beautiful. I don't see anything here about feeling your sexual desire activated. So one more passage, and then we'll close. The final one I want to take us to is Titus 2:12. So Paul is contributing a lot to our final understandings, and very interesting. Paul was a highly, highly educated Jewish scholar. He knew the Old Testament backward and forward. And he met Jesus, which completely changed his life. And so out of all the New Testament authors, he's the one that's the most difficult to read and understand. He's the guy who can string together sentences that are a whole chapter long. Like he has a brilliant mind. And not only is he a Hebrew scholar, but he also understands something of the Greek and Roman cultural context where Titus, this guy, would have been living in. And so when we look at words like porneia, like passion, like lust, these things would have been understood by the people of that day with a Greek way of thinking. We still have some of that way of thinking today in the Western world, having inherited it through European thought. However, some of our ways of approaching words like lust, as we've seen today, are not always incredibly helpful. So here we have, let's see where we are, but speak things which benefit sound doctrine. Letter from Paul to Titus, so instructions. And so he's saying to do something, exhort servants, teach the younger men, teach the women, teach the older women, teach the men. So speak the things that benefit sound doctrine, all of these things. Why? Why should you teach these things? Why should the people, the men, the women, the servants, rather, I think you might use the word slaves in here, which would be more accurate. For the grace of God hath appeared, bringing salvation to all men. Cool. Instructing us to the intent that denying ungodliness, taken literally, not being like God, and worldly lusts. So imagine drawing a line right here. On the one side is ungodliness and worldly lusts. On the other side is living soberly and righteously and godly in this present world. So what does lust have to do? It has to do with not being sober. And soberness has to do with this idea of maturity. It's not necessarily referring to avoiding alcohol. It has to do with this idea of being intentional, of being serious, of having a gravitas, of being sober-minded, not letting your mind be all over the place and taken over by your desire. So there's even a little bit more, but we understand this. And so what I like and why I wanted to close with this section is that there is more to do. Instead of focusing on lust and how do we get away from it, let us start doing this. Live soberly, righteously, and godly. Look for the blessed hope, the appearing of the glory of the great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. And you can see also this other one. One more example of lust at the end. But now that we've looked at these, I would encourage you to open your own Bible. If you have a concordance in the back, you can look for the word lust, see where it shows up. See if it makes sense, this way of shifting our understanding of lust from all sexual desire to understanding it as excessive sexual desire. If you can see this tiny word here, they use the word craving. And see how that changes the way you read these passages. What do you learn? I find that we spend so much time reading with our existing understanding of what words mean to us in our culture that sometimes we can come to this book and we can impose our understanding of what's there. And the reason why I decided to make this study is I'm actually sharing a post on Facebook. And yes, I am like omnipresent on social media these days, or attempting to be, with just a little bit of an introduction. And I wanted to provide a deeper look at what happens when we let the Bible speak for itself. What if instead of holding on to a preconception about what lust is and being like, oh no, I felt sexual desire. Oh no, I was aroused by this. What if we're like, oh yeah, my body is responding naturally. And we learn how to watch ourselves and see and observe when that desire grows out of control, when it grows in a direction that may be a violation of that covenant to love and honor one another. Because sexual desire in itself is not lust. On the other hand, craving, this huge uncontrollable appetite, this burning desire for something, as we've seen, it's a deception, something we want to avoid. And if that's something you want help with, please reach out, send me a message. It's what I'm here for. This is the work that I'm called to right now, is to support people who are like you on this journey, asking the question, what, really? Sexual desire might actually be a good thing, but distortions of sexual desire, and you're like, oh man, but like so much of my life seems to reflect this distortion. And I want it to be healthy. I want it to be beautiful. I want it to be something that I'm no longer ashamed of. Reach out. Let's talk. If you have any questions about this study, I'm also happy to connect. I'm going to stop the screen share now and just say thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for watching later. Thank you for your interactions. Thank you for your openness to look into the Bible and see that really there is an absolutely incredible message in here. That Christianity has something to offer to our culture today that is something other than don't do it unless you're married. That there is this way of looking at sexuality as something that is sacred and not sinful. It's what I call a new Christian sexual ethic. So subscribe to this channel, connect with me on one of my social media. If you want to learn more, there's going to be more like this coming up in the days ahead. I'll see you soon.